Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we're talking about activating the belly center.
Yes, for all 9 types and not only for body types. And we're speaking directly from London. We've been doing retreats here. And again, we have the opportunity of recording this in person. I mean, both of us being at the same place.
Right. And this is the third in the series that we've done on activating the centers. So I'd actually love to hear you say a little bit of summary information, providing a little context about how important it is to work with the 3 centers of intelligence when we're doing Enneagram work. And we talked in the first episode in this series about activating the head center, and our resident expert on the head center, Uranio Paes, did that one on his own, and he's very, very well equipped to do.
And as a head type, I don't actually remember I was alone in that. As a repressed body type.
So I remember not being there more than you remember doing it alone, or me not being there. Okay.
Oh no, it's not because of you. It's because I don't have memory for many things, because the head is overworking all the time.
Okay, so maybe next episode, overdoing the head center.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I think one of the reasons of inner work in general and self-development is to rebalance the centers and opening up more fully the 3 centers. And when you go to Gurdjieff's theory, it's way more complicated than saying 3 centers. It's more sophisticated,
Right.
but it's a good start point to say we have head, heart, and body.
Right.
And when and only when we have all 3 totally operating, we can think of presence. Of the state of being more fully in oneself, which is pivotal for any healthy way of living life and spiritual experiences that come only after that.
Mm-hmm. So like really present in the physical body, but also in the present moment, really having a deep awareness of all of you.
I think in the basic initial definition of presence, people say too much. Oh, it's being in the body, right? But while it's true, I think it's also a lot about being in all 3 centers and having all 3 centers open, and that is a very, very central task. And sometimes I'm concerned when I see Enneagram teachings that say, "Oh, you're a head type." And then they say, yeah, I use my head more than the others, and period. While the actual reason of existing for the Enneagram is, if you are now seeing that you allow your head to dominate, develop the heart center and the body center, and make sure you are using the head center healthily.
Right.
So that's what inner work is about.
Right. Speaking of the body center, your sweet little dog just finished the biscuit you gave him to bribe him to be quiet. He's looking around for what he's going to do next.
Yeah, and he's sort of sick, and I fear giving him another treat, but he'll certainly blackmail me in a minute. It's like he knows when I'm recording.
He does,
and then he blackmails me. Here he comes.
Here
Anyway, instinct. So yes. Animal instinct.
So part of the body.
How does Quito, my dog, know that I'm recording and he can get an extra treat while I'm recording?
Yes.
It's just his belly.
His animal wisdom that coming from his belly.
Right. And it's the same way that dogs in Japan during the tsunami, they rapidly run up the mountains
before it happened. Yes.
Right. And how do they know that? Right. So there is a body knowing, or a belly knowing, or a visceral knowing. Right. And that connects to the 5 senses, human senses, that are very well described. So I don't always remember the 5 words in English. Help me. So smelling, then touching, hearing, then
my favorite, tasting.
And the audition, the listening. right?
Listening. Yeah.
So this is what instinct is, the five
Mm,
senses. But
mm.
then being really competent in using all of them wherever you are, and in all moments of life. Here I go with the treat. Yes.
The cameras.
Yes. Oh, the camera's
has
moving.
a
uh
mind of its own.
okay.
You
It's
programmed it
funny.
to cut me out.
Yeah. No, don't be that sensitive.
I'm teasing.
Yes. So the thing is, yeah, and if you're listening to us on just audio, sometime you may want to watch us on YouTube because it's a little funnier. But don't speak badly about my hair, please. I know it's usually not tidy, but anyway,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I want to say that
Well, before you say that, I just want to say that I think the instinctive center, the belly center, is the least well understood
hmm,
by people generally, right?
right,
People understand thinking and analyzing with the head, and since the 1990s and emotional intelligence, we understand the heart, relational intelligence, empathy, compassion. But the body center, the belly center, we often get questions about that because it is hard to sometimes understand or put into words in the
hmm,
same way the other two centers are.
right.
So I think it's especially important as we work with the centers for people to really get, like, what is the belly center all about? What is its function? What role does it play? And how do different types experience it?
Yeah, I think it's been widely neglected by society, and
Hmm.
it's almost all societies, maybe with the
Mm,
exception of a few African, South
right.
American
Yeah.
societies, but
Hmm.
it's widely neglected, and especially in areas like academia. You know,
Mm,
people don't really acknowledge that there is this third intelligence. And then what happens is that even body types, depending on the context they are in, they don't use much the instinct for their own sake. Of course, the instinct is operating all the time, but they don't feel that they can use it. So I remember a coachee I had, a person from a bank, and she was a one. And she told me, I can't do what you're telling me to do. This thing of not doing all reports and analysis and talking so mentally with your bosses. I can't because people just don't trust that I'm going the right way by just following my gut.
right.
So society sort of oppresses body types more than it does, I think, even with heart types, and definitely being easier for head types.
Definitely. I saw a really good presentation one time at a International Enneagram Association conference in, I think it was 2009, by these people who were really talking about what instinctual intelligence is and how, if we had an ideal society, how we would change the school system
Yeah.
to to include body type kids,
Hmm.
right? Things and it was fascinating to me because I hadn't ever thought about this
Yeah.
before, but they talked about how all kinds of problems happen for body type kids because their main intelligence is not recognized and supported.
Yeah.
So, for instance, body type kids are often the ones that get really squirmy in class when they have to sit still for a long time
Hmm.
or think. So much of education speaks to the head
Yeah.
and not the body. And so things like, and it was so interesting when they were saying, here's how it would be better, like what you could do in schools, and things I never would have thought of. Like, for instance, they said it was really good for body type kids to wear uniforms
Hmm.
and to do things like marching in formation,
Right.
or doing movements that were coordinated with each other, and of
Yeah.
course having a lot of sort of playtime on the playground and making
Hmm.
sure that there's a lot of time devoted to that, in
Right.
proportion with the other kinds of things that you might do at school. So I thought it was really great. They also talked about, and this might be a little more controversial, about how they believed that a lot of the kids that were body types and really misunderstood because of the education system,
Yeah.
how they were sometimes medicated,
Or
um,
considered less. I see that.
totally
Yeah.
considered not as intelligent because there's a kind of book intelligence that's a
Yeah.
little bit more head type intelligent, and that's the definition of intelligence. So, and I had friends in school, friends that I've known since I was little, who never really liked like school, like the
Mm.
going to school and reading the book and having to memorize things. It just wasn't their thing, and ended up going to vocational school or running business or something like that, and having just as much intelligence as any other person, but society doesn't recognize it and value it. So
Yeah.
I think I love talking about the centers because it's such a fundamental part of the Enneagram work.
Yeah.
And there are these differences in understanding. I mean, you and I have talked about how we speak different languages sometimes, you being a head type and me being a heart type, and how easy it is to completely misunderstand each other
Mhm.
because we don't understand sort of the world that we're each living in. And we're trying to develop greater access to the others, but it takes time and work. And of course, sometimes under stress, you kind of go back to your default mode.
Right, exactly. And a few more things. I believe that there are some values or skills that come more easily for body types,
Mm.
and that when all of us develop the body center and
Hmm.
activate it,
Yeah.
we can develop those values automatically. What
Hmm.
are they? Like you were talking about students
Hmm.
and the value of studying hard, working hard, keeping a discipline,
Yeah.
and seeing that as being correct,
Hmm.
or having things like honor
Hmm.
or order,
Congruence.
congruence, yes, more than coherence, which I think is more mental.
Hmm.
So people need to walk the talk, and also responsibility in general.
Hmm.
So that is so important for all of us.
Yeah.
And when we don't activate the body
Hmm.
center, that there is usually a gap in
Mm.
some of these things.
Hmm.
But I think that partly um, this is function of being a body type or not,
Hmm.
or but also in the formation and the family of origin and the
Mm.
learnings over life. I don't mean that it's only body types that have those qualities.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I would also say that for non-body types, it might feel strange, but what happened when you activate the body center is you start apprehending reality in a non-cognitive and non-emotional way.
Right.
It's
Right.
just a sense. It's like I smell that there is something here.
Right. And the body center, starts developing, of course, before we have language and
Mm, yeah.
before the cognitive has come online. And so there's a way that this kind of very deeply instinctive wisdom can go very deep. And one of the things that what you were talking about made me think of is, well, I think, of course, any type can be a really good at sports. I think that some body types have, it's like an expression of their body intelligence that they're
Hmm.
really good at a sport.
Yeah.
Like when they practice it for a long time. I'm thinking of a good friend of mine that I've known since high school, and she's a nine, and she was like the best athlete. She
Mm,
was good in like three or four different sports. And when I was growing up, she was a soccer player, a local soccer player, and she was amazing.
yeah.
And the whole town kind of knew her as this incredible athlete. And again, any type can be a great athlete, but I do think there's a way that a lot of really exceptional athletes have that sort of body wisdom that really lends itself to to having really a high level of sports
Right.
aptitude.
I like football, soccer in
Yes,
the
I know you
US a
do.
lot. And there is a player here in Britain called Erling Haaland. He's a Norwegian that plays for Manchester City. And the other day he scored one of his incredible goals. And they asked him, "How did you do that? How did you have all that wit to do it?" And he said, "It's because I didn't think. I just did it." and
Yes,
and yeah,
yes,
and I see that athletes that are body types,
yeah,
they're really good in the sprint.
uh-huh,
So it's about another quality, which is getting quickly into action,
yeah,
and without needing to feel or think.
yeah,
And actually what is good about body types is that they they go to action and to practice very quickly, but also they learn by doing
right,
very competently.
Right.
And for adult learning, we talk about experiential activities, and this
Right.
is what body types need.
Right.
And head types and heart types also need to go more quickly into action. So
Yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking about myself as an athlete because I also played sports a lot up until high school and a little bit after. And I remember sports was harder for me at being a heart type because the heart would get involved in a way that was not good for sports performance. For
mm,
instance, I played softball was my main sport, and I was a pitcher for a while, and I loved being a pitcher and I loved the challenge of
mm,
learning to be good. But if something happened where I started to feel bad, I would go like totally downhill. Like I could not sustain, sort of the right movement because my heart would get too involved. So I
mm.
think there are maybe a little bit more challenges for head types and heart types in
Yes.
sports,
Yeah.
and probably great athletes who are those types
Yeah.
find ways to work that through. But I do think that it's kind of amazing when you see a body type athlete that's
Right.
operating at a high level.
Yeah, I agree. But you're teasing me too much talking about sports,
I
and I can't
know.
stop. So I'll say one last thing. There is
Your
this.
favorite subject, more than the
Well,
Enneagram.
yeah, sort of. Yeah. So there is this podcast, one of the several that I listen when it comes to football, with three important footballers here
Mm,
in England, and I'm talking about soccer. Alan
right.
Shearer, Gary Lineker, and Micah Richards.
Hmm.
And I believe that one is a head type. I think that Gary Lineker is a 7. Alan Shearer is an 8,
Hmm.
a body type,
Hmm.
and Micah Richards for me is a 2.
Are they current players or former players?
Former players, all
Uh-huh.
three.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a great podcast, very funny. They relate
Ah,
very well with
what's it
each
called?
other. It's called
Because I'm sure
The
everyone is
Rest is
wondering.
Football.
The rest is football.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the other day there was a question from a listener of the podcast asking, "Did you guys at your time pay attention to the cameras on the stadium?" And
Mm.
then more or less the discussion was that Lineker said
And that's
um,
the 7,
the
right?
7. Yeah,
Hmm.
he started philosophizing like, I don't recall if at that time there were cameras. I think they came in this year, and then it wouldn't be hard. So he made a thesis of it and not his actual experience.
A little essay, yeah.
Then Alan Shearer, the 8, said, fucking not. You know, why would I pay attention to the camera?
Yeah.
I need
Trigger
to.
warning, there was a swear
Yes,
word
I'm
there.
sorry. But it's what he said. I'm
Yes,
just repeating.
you're quoting.
And then Mika Richards said, since I was 16, the most important thing for me was to know where the camera was. So, yeah, so you can see that.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a great example.
Mm. But then how to activate
Yeah,
the body center for in general
right,
and for each of the 9 types.
right.
So activating the body center in general, I think, implies being able to focus on those 5 senses
Mm,
and being able to push away thoughts and feelings and be in touch with faculties of those 5 devices we have in our body.
mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Eyes, nose, mouth, ear, hands. So there are exercises that I used to do at a Gurdjieffian school that I was a
Interesting.
student at, that had to do, for instance, with practicing different kinds of visual attention.
Hmm.
So focused vision, then diffused vision, like seeing just one thing and then seeing the bigger picture
Mm-hmm.
and alternating from this. This is developing the sight instinct,
Hmm.
and then doing other things, block vision more,
Hmm.
and then things like pay attention to your hand, pay attention to your foot. Um, and that was a big part of Gurdjieff's work in what he called self-remembering,
Hmm.
because his thesis was you don't try to self-remember who you are in essence
Mhm.
before you know where your nose is. So
Right. You
it's
have to
like,
start from the bottom with your
exactly,
feet and your hands and
yeah.
being aware of them.
And he was a body type 8, I think,
Right. Yeah.
and I think he was very concrete. And
Yeah.
the body types know how important it is to be concrete and to not be just philosophical when doing inner work.
Right. And I seem to remember, and you'll know more better than I will. I seem to remember that the Gurdjieffians have some meditation techniques that are like body scans,
Yeah,
right? Like you pay attention to your foot, and then you pay attention to your ankle, and
yeah,
then you're in a certain way. Like, again, I
yeah,
haven't done this in a long time, so I don't remember exactly, but that
yeah.
seems like a really good example of what
Yeah,
you're
there
talking
are
about.
some of those, although not only in Gurdjieff movement.
Yeah.
And then dealing with scents and, like exercises like going to a street market and, smelling all the different perfumes of each fruit and more. So
Right.
you develop it by doing.
Yeah.
And also really paying attention to what your belly is telling you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's pointing to one direction. It's telling you, I can't trust this, or whatever it brings that is not cognitive,
Mm-hmm.
but also not emotional.
Mm-hmm.
So I think putting effort and attention on this
Mm-hmm.
is a very good idea to develop the body center, but also of things like walking and sitting, considering your belly the most.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sitting on my belly, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm walking with my belly pulling the whole movement and sensing
Mm-hmm.
my legs.
Mm-hmm.
It's like pushing forward the belly and
Mm-hmm.
walking. These are very simple ways of
Yeah.
developing that.
Yeah.
But then anything more spontaneous using the body,
Mm-hmm.
like spontaneous dance
Mm.
or everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you would add anything to this
Well,
or.
I remember I had a really powerful experience recently. And I think where I am in my own inner work is I'm really needing to focus on activating the belly center, the body center. I'm of course very emotional, but I'm also someone who's
Yeah.
very much in their head, and it's actually blocked my inner growth that I can't get out of my head and sort of more completely focused on the body. So I'm trying to do that more. And I had an experience recently at one of our retreats where in our psychological Enneagram retreat, on the third morning, we do a dynamic meditation, which I love. And it's a long one, and so it has two different parts, and it's long, but it's a lot of movement, and it's in the group. And I had a really great experience of being like, I think one of the first I've ever had that was so clear, of really being in my body and not my head. And it was interesting because one of our friends who works with us, who's one of our staff people, that morning before, and it wasn't really planned this way, she and I got together and she helped me with a grounding exercise. And it took about 20-minute grounding exercise of really seeing like roots from the bottom of my feet going into the earth. It was, she took me through the chakras, and it was a really great grounding exercise. And I have a feeling that having done that before the dynamic meditation helped me to be able to finally, in this dynamic meditation, get completely focused in the
Yes.
body, which was an
Yes.
amazing sensation that
Mm.
it was like, wow, finally I'm out of my
Yes.
head.
Yeah.
And I think there's a way, and I think it might be related to being a self-preservation dominant and having a strong element of fear in my
Mhm.
makeup. I think that's part of what drives my head activity, and having a hard time letting in energies and new experiences because my head wants to control what's happening too much.
Mm.
So anyway, that was an amazing
Mm.
experience. So I would imagine things like you said, spontaneous movement, dynamic movement meditations. I remember when I did a Rika training, which is the Oscar Achazo school
Mhm.
that he started. He has this amazing set of what they call psychocalisthenics,
Psychocalisthenics. Yeah.
and it's a series of body movements. And I've been thinking I want to do those again because that was also something that was very focused on the body, and even different movements were focused on different areas of the body.
Mm.
And I thought it was really brilliant. And one of the things he would talk about in the book that describes it is that we're organisms, and we have this body, and so we need to, for kind of a basic level of health and functioning,
Mhm.
like integrated functioning, we need to do these kinds of physical activities to kind of wake up and
Right.
align with our bodies. But
Mhm.
but I think there's that, and there's also what you were saying is the five senses, which I don't always think about, aligned with the body center, because I think when we're in our body center, it gives us access to a kind of gut wisdom that I think body types understand, but some other types sometimes don't understand. Like I remember I was doing a typing interview once, and I was interviewing a woman who turned out to be an eight. And I asked her one of my type six questions. I said, "So how much do you trust people or not?" And she thought for like 1 second, and she said, "Oh, I I I immediately know who I can trust and who I can't trust. I
Mm,
immediately get that. And when I've gone against it, I always am proved wrong." So like
mm,
she gets a feeling like I can't trust this person, and then she trusts them, and then she realizes that was wrong. So
mhm.
she's learned that to kind of feel that kind of gut knowing.
Right. Yes. Yeah, very interesting stuff, and stuff that isn't well understood by
Yeah.
many people and not much
Yeah.
written about.
Yeah. And by the way, while it popped into my mind, I just want to insert a short thing, which is
Hmm.
that you and I don't really agree with one aspect of centers theory that's out there in the Enneagram world, which is that we all have a repressed center and that all the types have a particular repressed
Right.
center.
And you mean that both you and I don't agree. It's not that we don't agree with
Yes.
each other. Yeah.
Yes. You and I don't agree with that
Yeah.
theory that
Hmm.
sometimes is out there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and it's normal that we have a little more easiness opening up a particular second center and not the third,
Hmm.
but with no particular pattern per type.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so should we talk a little about each of the nine types?
Sure.
Maybe starting with heart types and then just finishing with the body types.
Okay.
Last time we started with head types for the activating the head center.
Okay.
Okay, so for heart types, I think that there is this tendency to stay with emotions and process them, um, and also to understand and communicate them. But that is a little too slow for a body type, and body types simply go do regardless of
Mm, mhm,
emotions,
mhm,
which is not good on one hand
mm,
because they don't finish processing the emotions and they fall into the mistake of doing something about them,
mhm,
but also it's not good for heart types to stay too long in that and don't go do something about it.
mhm,
So something in between perhaps is the good thing. But
mhm,
for choose, I think body wisdom comes with the arrow to 8, which is one of the arrows of point 2 on the Enneagram's diagram
mhm.
for an 8. And that's what we call the second arrow, the arrow with
Right.
to point 8.
Mhm,
And when I see choose doing that, doing it positively, constructively, um, I just see that they activate a strength coming from the belly to build boundaries or to be strong for themselves and not
mm,
only because of someone else,
mhm,
to stand up for themselves and to find an inner value without needing to be recognized or
mhm,
approved
mhm,
not depending on the other person.
mhm,
But you're the chew here.
mhm.
So what do you think happens with chews finding sometimes hard to activate the belly center, and what would be a hint for chews listening to us?
Um, I think I just think it's being sort of having our focus too much in emotion
Mhm.
and our reactions are categorizing things as I like this, I don't like this,
Mm.
you know, this feels good, this feels bad. I think sometimes we're just too much in our hearts. And for instance, when I drive and you're sitting in the passenger seat, you'll often push my body back a little bit, like
Mm.
because I'm leaning forward in a way,
Mhm.
and you'll
Yeah.
push my shoulders back, almost as if to say, drive more with your belly than your
Yeah.
heart,
Right.
And I do think that there is a way that like I'm leaning forward, like with my heart going first
Mm.
instead of my belly going first, because it's a you drive mostly from the belly center. It's that kind of an activity.
Yes, yes, yes. Driving should be done with the belly center mostly.
Exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
and I do think part of it is just putting your attention there, right?
Yeah.
Just recognizing if your attention is how you're feeling, how someone else is feeling, and or an emotional reaction you're having, and recognizing, what if you focused on your body, what's going on there. And I'm remembering now when I was in school learning to be a psychotherapist, and I was in my Gestalt therapy class. I remember I used to get super irritated. This is, I'm around 30 at the time. And I used to get super irritated by the Gestalt teacher because they were constantly saying, "So, what do you sense in your body right now? What do you sense in your body right now? What do you sense in your body right now?" And my answer was always nothing. Like, when I go to check in with what I'm sensing in my body, I'm not really feeling anything distinctive. Nothing's standing out. I can focus on my body, but nothing much going on there.
Mm.
So I think that over time, though, I've gotten better. And certainly some psychotherapists who have a little bit more of a body based orientation, or are very aware that emotions often can be sensed in the body as a way of even getting in touch with what's happening generally. So I think it's a focusing on the body. It's doing things where you get out of your head and out of your
Mm.
heart and into your, like, dance, sports, movement, moving meditation, like a walking meditation,
Right.
and putting the focus, like remembering over and over again to put your focus somewhere in your body or your senses, and not just in your heart, or if you're a heady heart type,
Mm.
in your head.
Right, right. I remember you talked about meditation, and I remember that after a meditation I had in the past, I had lunch, and I noticed that I was tasting the food in a whole new way, and
Wow.
it shocked me that to see that I didn't taste it like that before.
Hmm.
So I decided to enroll a while later at a wine course, and in which I would need to just smell the different smells
Mm.
and see the color of the wine, and that
Hmm.
really helped me.
It's
But I
great.
think body work of all types or are is
Hmm.
really good.
Right, right. And even getting a massage, because, like, I
Yeah.
noticed for me as a two, I really avoid massages.
Mm,
And I think it's because of how I feel.
mm,
It's like, ooh, it feels sort of vulnerable. It's hard to
mm-hmm,
receive.
mm-hmm,
It's uncomfortable. And so I focus on that feeling of discomfort, and not
mm.
the fact
On the
that
body itself.
it's really important to be in the body, and massage can help you focus more on the body and just that bodily experience.
Mm. And there is this thing of why body intelligence is important for everybody, but why do you think it's important for choose in particular?
For twos in particular, I think it's as a balancing out of too much focus on other people, and too much focus on relationship, and too much focus on what's going on emotionally.
Mm,
It's almost like there's something kind of basic and practical and simple and grounded by, if you focus more on your body than how you're feeling, or more on what's happening in your body or in your sensory experience, than you are focusing on what's going on with that other person over
mm.
there.
Yes, yes, yes. So should we move on to three?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, I think that threes are misunderstood by many as if they were almost like body types because they
Right.
go do.
Because they're so active and they're so focused on doing. Exactly.
And maybe one could even make a case that because they are very active and they go do, that they might develop instincts a little more easily than the other six non-body types,
Right.
the other five non-body types.
Hmm.
But but it's a mistake because that doing is so much uh, something that's happening while the three is paying attention to what others are thinking and or to the goals.
How others are perceiving what they're doing. It's so
Yes.
much.
Hmm.
It's such an interesting case because, like you say, they can look like body types, and some people even try to classify them as
Yeah.
body types because they're the
Very wrong in
doers.
our
Very
view. Yeah.
wrong in our view, because the doing and the activity is motivated by the heart.
Yeah.
Right? It's motivated by how I want to be seen, how I want that person to feel about me, how what I need to be that other people value, and value is more of an emotional
Yeah.
experience.
But I would say it's not only motivated. During the action, they are not as much in touch with the instincts.
Right.
It's like imagine a type 3 executive walking on the pathway in their company, and looking at other people while they go by.
Right,
So
right,
they are
right.
doing, they are running, but they are not in the
Yes.
body. And
Yes.
yeah,
And you also hear a lot of threes say that they've been outrunning, trying to outrun emotions their whole life.
yeah,
And so part of what they're doing when they're doing so much is getting away from their emotions,
yes.
because emotions slow them down. They're uncomfortable. They get in the way of being successful and
Mm,
achieving things. And so it's important to understand how much heart-based threes are,
yeah.
even though they're very active and they do a lot.
Yeah, and I think B that activating the body center requires somehow that we focus on any process instead of the result. And I think threes are too much attached to results and forget the process at times.
Hmm.
There might be differences for some subtypes, but for South Press three, but I think it's always more about the result than the process. So imagine, a case that I saw, a type 3 person who, when stretching before exercising,
Hmm.
he would try to stretch two muscles at a time. And that's not
Mm.
process. It's like, I'm trying to be
I'm efficient.
quick,
Yeah, yeah,
efficient, and then, it doesn't really work.
yeah.
It's not about the process of being with your body.
Right,
So this is something threes can stop doing so that they activate the body center.
right, right.
Yeah.
And I think activating the body center for threes, like getting more in touch with their body, doing more things where they focus on their body instead of, what they're doing or what's going on outside, is a way of getting more grounded in themselves, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
three's big problem is that they're not sort of living life from a truer self. They're living life more from a persona.
Right.
And a persona is something that is really not body based,
Mm,
and so being able to get in touch with your body in the present moment in terms of what you're experiencing, what you're sensing, is, I think, a really good way for threes to kind of to come home to themselves.
yeah. And the body center is not very interested in how it's perceived.
Right,
Um,
right, right. And
yeah.
it's the only center that's really based in the here and now moment, in the
Mhm.
present moment.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So force.
Force.
Yeah, I think for force, the attachment to emotions and particular things like suffering, and processing what's inside, bring them pretty much away from the senses, and it's very important for force to stop feeling and go do right now. Like, it's very useful at times for force to have something they need to do in the next half hour.
Mhm,
It's paradoxical for self press 4,
mhm,
but not having as much time to keep feeling and to go simply do is a good idea.
mhm,
um, as we know, mainly self-pressed fours do too much, but I don't think that they disconnect from the heart while doing it. And
mhm,
going to the doing on point one, the
mhm,
first arrow,
mhm,
means stop feeling and go do something. And sometimes even something like organizing my drawer,
mhm,
that really helps. And many fours hate me when I say this, but
mhm.
it's really helpful, because then if you're organizing your drawer, it's very hard to keep just feeling, unless
Right,
you're seeing older pictures
right,
in your drawer. But
right.
so going to process again, and being a little bit more organized and
Mhm.
no, doesn't exist.
I don't think so.
Yeah, okay,
Process oriented.
process oriented, yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I do think that the self-pres fours listening to this or watching this are probably saying, well, wait a minute, I'm really, really active and
Mm,
I'm really in my body when I'm doing so much. And maybe they're not really in their body, but it can feel like it because they are super active. They work really hard. They can hold a lot in their body in terms of, sort of holding, internalizing feelings and suffering and pain and other people's pain. and so sometimes they're really tough physically, you know.
Mm, mhm.
So I just kind of want to name that because that can be sort of a variation, important variation of fours. I think social fours, for instance, are the ones that really need to stop being lost in emotions and really get practical or get in touch with their body, almost like as a daily practice, you know,
Mm,
of getting like switching your attention from how you're feeling to what you're feeling in your foot, you know, what you're sensing in your foot,
right.
or something that really brings them into their body, because I think that can actually make them in some ways more grounded so that they can feel their emotions in a more balanced way and
Mhm.
not have so many ups and downs, or be so identified with their emotions, or controlled by their emotions.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And for force, using the body center sometimes might be a little more easy than for some other types when they engage with their authenticity and they just, stand, speak their voices, and then they can just more easily connect to that body feeling of just, you know, I don't want to curse again, but I will. It's like no bullshit.
Right.
It's like being just don't say anything that's fake, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think that indirectly can activate the body center for
Mm-hmm.
force.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about things like, and this may be for fours, but also for all types. What about something like yoga?
Mm.
That's sort of really almost a meditation where you focus on the body.
Yeah, I think yoga is great for everybody, really. I'm sometimes get a bit concerned when ones do yoga because they try to do it too perfectly
Yeah,
and
yeah.
with tension. They find a way to
Yes.
do it with tension,
Right.
while many times ones do it in a way that's very healing.
Yeah.
But it's that I've seen ones doing it this way. And
Right.
the psychocalisthenics that you mentioned from
Mm-hmm.
Oscar Ichazo has a lot of yoga in it, but channeled in a particular way
Mm-hmm.
that is really designed to wake people up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love yoga as a resource for
Mm-hmm.
everybody, and I think that fours engage more easily with yoga,
Mm-hmm.
um, because of the beautiful postures,
Right.
and some different movements and more.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit
Mm-hmm. It's like
artistic
yeah,
also.
exactly. It's like
Mm,
there's something of an art to it.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. In doing it in your own
right.
individual way, and focusing on the way you are
Hmm.
putting yourself in certain forms.
Yeah. Now, head types, I think that activate the body center, especially by stop thinking and doing right now,
Mm-hmm.
like shortening timelines
Yeah.
and saying things before they totally know them, improvise, and just being available for life when life is happening
Mm-hmm.
instead of planning so much. That is difficult for head types, and at the same time it's a great solution to activate the body center. And I believe that when head types are too much in their heads, they are truly disconnecting from their bodies. There is no such a thing like being in the head but remaining in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So coming to the body really implies disconnecting a bit from the head
Mm-hmm.
on the reverse way.
Mm-hmm.
So for five, do you want to say anything about head types in general?
I mean, I think you're the expert. So yeah, I would just you know, agree with you strongly that getting into the body is really good for head types
Mm,
and is a really good counterpoint to being too much in the head. And it's funny because I remember Helen Palmer used to say something. She used to say, head types need to get more into the body types need to get more into the heart, and heart types need to get more into the head. But of course, we need to get into all three centers.
mm,
So that may just be partial, but maybe that's a first step kind of thing
mm.
of really stretching yourself in an important way.
Yeah, I tend to see more the second and third steps connected to the arrows, but
Right.
I get what Helen was saying.
Yeah.
Now for fives, I think it's really imperative like either doing sports or using the body or having body sensations, activating the instincts, and not only emotions. And many times I see that it's easier for fives to activate senses first and emotions next, which makes sense with the Enneagram's diagram, because before going to two, fives need to go to eight with the arrows.
Right.
So in my case, I activated the body center first through a meditation, and only later
A dynamic meditation, right?
yes, and then only later the more heartfelt experience started to be easier, but not yet very easy. So I think that fives need also to break a paradigm that their heads are so important, that they are their heads.
Yeah.
And that isn't true. And it's very, very useful for fives to understand the importance of the body center. When they do, even theoretically, they easily commit to doing something about it more easily. There needs to be an understanding of that. So reading something about it can be really helpful.
Yeah.
How instincts can help us in life, and how instincts work in animals, and how animals are more instinctively intelligent than us.
So you're saying, like, start with the understanding.
Yes.
Speak to the head, the need to understand intellectually
Right.
first as a bridge to finding good reasons and
Right.
and being convinced of how important it is to really put a different kind of focus on the body.
And not necessarily about the fives, but in general, I just want to say activating the body center is honoring the fact that we are animals.
Yes.
And human primates. So the animal side of us needs to be acknowledged and used.
Yeah.
And then it's dangerous when we stay only in that.
Right. But we have to get in touch with it so that we can move beyond it, that animal self.
Right, exactly.
And we need to integrate it and include it because it is a source of wisdom.
So sixes, in the pattern of doubt and always anticipating things mentally, it's very hard to keep in touch with the body. But it's the very first necessary movement of growth, going to arrow 9 and relaxing. Before connecting to the body, it's essential for nines to learn for sixes to learn how to relax on 9. So relaxation is a bridge to being in the body for sixes, in my view. Another thing is starting to say what they are sensing at the moment without procrastination. And usually that will happen not only from the head. Like if I say it now, I'll use some kind of sense, although it can be even communicated as an idea. But it's a way of training that on top of everything we suggested in more general terms. Finally, I believe that sixes really benefit from being together with people who go more straight away into action, if they go with them, and not if they become contrarians to those people.
Right.
So differently than fives, they allow themselves to be a bit more influenced by people who go more actively through life.
Right. And it's great when a six finds out that when they move into action, fear goes away, and how they delay action because they get too engaged with fear and too engaged with the thinking function and driven by fear often, and how much of a relief it can be to get more into their body, into action, and to allow themselves to focus more on what's physical instead of the mental activity.
Right. Yes. So sevens. And finally, sevens are not the last ones. Sevens are in the middle. We'll still need to talk about eights, nines, and ones after. So sevens, they activate the body center on point 1. And that means that when sevens are in touch with discipline and some kind of positive anger that makes them go to the end with things, and that say stop looking at other sides, just focus. They're doing the work of activating the body center pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they need to be a lot grounded.
Mm-hmm.
Grounding exercises are important for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but like uh, in, really needed for sevens,
Mm-hmm.
and as one of the main things they need to practice. And that means don't don't only be in the air, in the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
Stay here on
Mm-hmm.
earth and have your feet on earth. So literally stepping on earth like bare feet and
Yeah.
sensing it, and not just for having fun out there, but sensing your feet on the ground. Super
Yeah.
important for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow I think it's even more so for sevens.
Yes.
And
Yes.
moving less. I think
Yes.
that body types can be very active,
Mm-hmm.
but usually they're not very clumsy,
Mm-hmm.
wobbly,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that they need to move a little slower,
Mm-hmm.
especially sevens, to
Mm-hmm.
be a bit more in touch with the body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 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 exactly. And I mean, sevens, especially sevens who I would say are a little more fixated in their personality, they really benefit from grounding. And grounding is a kind of getting in touch with the physical nature and being in the body and being connected to the earth, because it helps them slow their pace and be more still, come back to a kind of grounded presence, which I think when the head really gets going and they're going after the bright shiny objects, and there's maybe even fueled by a little anxiety they might not be totally aware of, can really speed up and have the mental activity be what drives them. And so again, the body is a great counterpoint to being too mental in it, in exactly the way that sevens can be too mental in that monkey mind kind
Right.
of scattered way.
Yes. 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 So the body types now, I think that naturally they're better with
Yeah,
activating the body center,
definitely. Yeah.
but it's important to say that it's not because you are a body type that you are totally in your body.
Yeah.
Sometimes you are still fragmented and sensing only your viscera,
Mm-hmm.
and you trust too much in instincts. And sometimes the instincts are so big that you somaticize too
Mm-hmm.
much. And because emotions are not felt directly,
Mm-hmm.
and things in life,
Mm-hmm.
a little about the head center facts of life, are not processed, and then they come to the body,
Mm-hmm.
and then they body types damage the body,
Mm-hmm.
and instincts themselves become less available. So
Right.
to
It just like heart types can be out of touch with their heart or have
yeah,
their heart closed down or not be in touch with feelings, in
mm,
different ways. Body types can be not connected to their body, and
right,
again, just in the way all of us can for some similar reasons.
yeah. So I think the main activity for body types is discernment of using the body only for what the body is meant to do,
Hmm.
and stopping using it for other
Right.
actions or
Right.
things in life.
Right, because as we know, sometimes body types unconsciously use the body to try to feel emotions, for instance,
Mm,
as when they somaticize their emotions. And we've seen people, for instance, like eights who, instead of feeling their sadness or their grief or their, you know, more vulnerable emotion, will try to do something about it. Or again, somaticizing is when the body kind of tries to do the job of the heart, tries to somehow um, express feelings. We see this in things like eating disorders as well.
mm,
And so for body types, it's about, they really benefit from, exactly like you're saying, learning they need to activate the heart center to feel emotions and discern when the heart needs to do the job versus when some activity or experience of life is more should be done more with the body.
mm. So eights, I think that eights over trust instincts at times
Mm.
when they say, I always know when someone's not trustworthy.
Ah.
When the eights I have long term relationships with
Uh-huh.
many times tell me, actually, I don't always know because I made a mistake with that person and that other person,
Uh-huh.
either by not trusting and then seeing how trustworthy the person was, or
Uh-huh.
vice versa.
Uh-huh.
Because there is both this paradox in AIDS, both the judgmental side and
Mm-hmm.
the naivete.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting paradox
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
AIDS, and I think that is a bad use of instinct that comes from the overuse
Yeah.
and maybe over self confidence that many AIDS have.
Right, right. And part of being, as we say, too concrete and not abstract enough is a being too much focused in the body and not allowing yourself, for instance, to be more mental in terms of being more being more open to abstraction, and that it's different than concrete practical reality and what you
Uh,
can sense and feel with your gut.
yeah, and I think AIDS need to slow down,
Yeah.
control pace,
Yeah.
because they stop sensing.
Right. And
Li-
one of the ways they do that is think things through a little bit longer, get more
Right.
into the head.
But also in instinctual things themselves. Like I
Mm.
keep telling my type A daughter, Bia, eat more slowly. You're not tasting the
Ah,
food, you know. So
good example.
it's something that eights do very quickly, and then they don't really they are not really in touch with what's happening from a body perspective.
Yeah.
So slowing down
Mhm.
activates the body center more.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And recognizing and again being aware, more and more aware of how quickly you go into action, and to be able to interrupt that and pause and check in with yourself. Maybe how are you feeling right now? What's motivating that need to act so quickly, and think things through, all of those that going into the other centers, but also self observing and seeing how quick you can be to react or to want to use the body instead of something else.
Mhm. Right. So nines, I think nines are also paradoxical, but in another way,
Mm,
because they use instincts perhaps in the most brilliant way of all nine types,
mm,
but because they go outside to external demands from people and the environment, they delegate their instinctual
mm,
capacities to something outside them.
mm, mm,
And they forget themselves. And when they forget themselves, they numb out thoughts, feelings, but also sensations.
mm,
So
mhm,
everything gets anesthetized by a nine
mhm,
more fully in ego,
mhm,
ego sloth, which is
mhm,
forgetting about oneself and doing more non-important things.
mhm,
So I believe that the way for nines, one of the most important things for nines to activate the body center is to bring back the energy inside them
mm,
and notice
mhm,
your body, notice your breath, notice what what emotion is in there. But
mhm,
I say emotion because
mhm,
what happens with body types is that before they feel the emotions,
mhm,
they have a sense of the emotions,
mhm,
and that is useful in terms of developing
mhm,
the body center.
mhm,
To be in the body, you need to come back to your body,
mhm,
right, and
mhm,
not disperse all energy outside.
mhm. Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think when nines sort of lose themselves, when they merge too much with others or experiences outside themselves, it can really help them to notice that and to bring themselves back to getting grounded in their physical body,
Mhm.
which is, a familiar and relatively easy experience for them, but not when they kind of go unconscious or dissociate from what's happening and can get too caught up in, merging with something, or, losing their sense of their physical self, of their embodied
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah, and then once finally, I believe once block sensations because of the defense mechanism of reaction formation.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't allow themselves to stay with some of the body sensations that are more pleasant
Mm-hmm.
because they react against them. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I can't feel this now. I need to
Mm-hmm.
go back to duty.
Mm-hmm.
And duty is done using the body center, but in a more mechanical way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's not getting truly appropriated of the instincts to live life consciously.
Right.
So I think the key thing for once to activate the body center is to allow for impulses that
Mm-hmm.
come to them, and not only a planned activity that has a certain order or your bullet point list of things to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the suggestion here is to allow for what comes to you in the moment, and even
Mm-hmm.
if it freaks you out to go do that, is
Mm-hmm.
it right? Is it wrong? But
Mm-hmm.
going with it will be more respectful to the body center, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And one thing I want to ask you about body types in general, eights, nines, and
Although
ones.
I do want to say one more
Oh,
thing about
okay.
one,
I'm
type one.
sorry.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was just when we were talking thinking about ones in the body center, I couldn't help thinking of my father.
Mm,
And I think there are probably a lot of ones like him. And that is from early on, I think, in his life, he can't not exercise on a regular basis.
mm,
I think there's something in him, in his body centeredness, that is like, it's like he must exercise. He always had a form of exercise he would do for his most of his adult life. You know, from when I was a kid on, it would be badminton, and then later, when it was hard to find a badminton game, it was racquetball. Now, when he was younger, he was a student athlete in college. He was a varsity athlete. He was a swimmer, and he played other sports, but swimming was his main sport in school. He was actually a diver at Notre Dame.
mm,
But when he played, he had to, like, there was like, it was like there was going to be no negotiating about the fact that he had to play badminton or racquetball 3 or 4 times a week. And I think for him, it was this way of discharging
anger.
energy, angry energy mostly, because he controlled his anger a lot. It leaked out a lot. Sometimes he would explode. But I think it was almost, I don't think he did it consciously. I think it was just this body based kind of knowing that I must discharge this energy through physical activity. And, of course, it was physical activity he enjoyed. It was a game that he developed quite a bit of skill at. So that was fun and pleasurable, which is probably a healthy part of it for him. But I always think of that as something that was very reflective of this sense of just this knowing that
Mm,
in order to survive and be a one that
mm.
wasn't necessarily working on himself, he needed to work off that energy in exercise or in sports.
Yeah, of course, I think this is mostly good, and I wish I had your father's discipline to do sports. But I want to say that because it's a discharge of anger,
Yes.
a release, or
Yes.
just the same way that for nines, it may be a narcotization of some
Yes.
important things in their lives,
Yes.
and eights
Yes.
just acting out anger.
Yes.
I think that at times this intention damages the absorption of the good things of the body center.
Right, right. And I want to say, I would definitely see what my father did as partly good, but
Mm,
partly not, because
mhm,
what he was doing is discharging the emotion in exercise in a way without feeling it or
mm.
acknowledging it or processing it or developing a capacity to
Yes.
work with it with more consciousness.
Mm,
I think it was functional for him, but not necessarily something that he wasn't necessarily on an inner growth path and having his bodily activity as part of
yeah.
that. It was more of a way of maintaining the personality
Right.
than it was of doing something that was more developmental.
Right. And I think that the more refined body energy is one that is more spontaneous, as
Yeah.
in it moves us to the right direction at the moment.
Yeah.
And what happens with body types is that they use body activity in a very mechanical and repetitive way,
Yeah.
and that is not very
Yeah.
favorable.
And I want to say one more thing about ones. And now I'm thinking about my brother, who is also a social one. And I want to say, by the way, I've run into people out there who listen to our podcast who somehow think that I don't like ones because because I have the capacity to tease my brother. It's really sibling rivalry, nothing more than that. But I actually really admire my brother. He's really a great person. And one of the things he's been really, really getting into lately is, I mean, in a social one, it makes sense. He's learning everything he can about kind of the latest trends and knowledge in sort of physical healthcare,
Yeah.
like what to do to be well, like the latest research and what doctors are saying that not all doctors know, because the medical system, the medicine tends to be a little more focused on sort of emergencies or pharmaceutical industry priorities, or what, it's the way the system works. It's nothing against individual doctors, but my brother's real he's listening to these health podcasts. He's doing a cold plunge. He has this new diet that he's on. He's doing intermittent fasting, and it's all from his reading and his listening to podcasts on sort of the latest trends in healthcare. And, like, for instance, how to age gracefully. All these things have to do very much with the physical body.
Right.
So it's very interesting that he's drawn to this, and he's actually doing it all. He's really changing his life based on what he's learning, and it's very social one, the subtype of kind of really spending a lot of time researching and learning everything you can about how to do things the right way or the best way, and so that also reminds me of
Yes.
that.
Good job, Patrick. So now the question I had for you.
Yeah.
Holding is something very important for body types, all people, but body types mostly. And you can perhaps explain what that is, but I do think it's a way of activating the body center,
Mm.
as coming back to your body and find the contour of the body and the edges of the skin also.
Right, right. And what you're referencing, for people who aren't familiar with the term holding, it's actually both psychological and physical holding, and it's a kind of it's a core need that we all have from earliest time in childhood, from babyhood. And it's a kind of thing that everybody needs, but especially body types need to feel held, both physically, very much physically, but also psychologically. And what do I mean by psychological holding? It's like keeping in mind, like, someone else is holding your experience. Someone else, and this, like, for instance, when someone has a baby, good parenting can mean, like, having a routine for that child. Like, they sleep every day at the same time, they eat every day at the same time, and that's also a function of holding, and kind of someone who's there to attune to them and to respond to them in both physical ways and psychological ways. Again, body types really need this, and often the personality structure is in part shaped by failures of having core needs met around that holding function. And of course, eights, nines, and ones express that in different ways. And this is part of my object relations integration with the Enneagram. And by the way, I'll be doing a 1 day thing on that later this year, which I'm looking forward to, if you're interested in that topic. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I think
Online,
holding
right? Yeah.
online,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like a 1 day thing, and I hope you'll pop in, by the way, or
Mm.
do with me.
Mhm.
But it's very important for body types to feel that sense of holding, to be more grounded and rooted in a healthy physical sense of themselves.
Great. Okay. Anything else?
I think that about does it.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
So remember to activate your body center, because also Gurdjieff said Enneagram work and the Enneagram itself cannot be fully experienced if it's not physically. So very, very important approach also to inner work.
Right, right. Yes. So really interesting topic today. Thank you for all your
Thank you.
wisdom. I'm going to do this week's top 5 without Uranio. He left to go do something. But I am going to do the top 5 most interesting things about Uranio Paes because I think he did one of these about me recently. So turnabout is fair play, and I thought it would be fun. I think his was at the end of activating the head center. So now at the end of our Activating the Body Center podcast, this is my top 5 most interesting things about our friend, our teacher, Uranio Paes. So, first one, Uranio was the first person I ever met. I don't know. I think it's a little bit the Brazilian in him who loves to shop at the airport. So I had never heard of this. Like I saw stores at the airport, but I just assumed no one ever actually shopped at the airport. Like, why would you go to the airport to shop? Like you're on your way somewhere else, and the shops are just things you walk by on the way to catching your flight. So it's interesting because part of this that's interesting about Uranio is, as you know, as he's talked about many times, he's self preservation repressed, right? Which means he's sometimes late to things. He's not necessarily always concerned about being on time or, say, catching a flight. However, I need to tell you that the one thing he's extremely different, very opposite of that normal self pres repressed style, is getting to the airport because he likes to get to the airport super early, like maybe 4 hours, which I think is great because that means he's not going to miss any flights to where we're going to teach courses, which is great for me and all of us. But he gets there super early, like, and he's really strong about this. Like, he really wants to get there 4:30, 4.5, 5 hours early, right? And I always wondered, this is so interesting because it's not very self-pres repressed of him. It's something that maybe some of our us self-pres dominants would do, but he does it well. I found out that a big reason he wants to get there so early, although I'm not sure he would admit it, is that he likes to go shopping. So he will shop at clothing stores for himself. He'll buy gifts, but he likes to have a lot of time to shop at the airport. And like I said, I didn't even know this was a thing, right? So that's my number 5 most interesting thing about Uranio Paes. Now my number 4 is a little bit related to this tangentially, and that is that many of you who don't know Uranio well may not know that he is an extremely generous person, extremely generous. And one of the reasons this is interesting is it goes against our stereotype of fives as being kind of avaricious, of withholding things, wanting everything for themselves, hoarding, not necessarily opening their hearts to other people. The definition of avarice is kind of like an inability to receive and open up your heart to give. And certainly he can be a bit in avarice when, especially when it comes to spending time with others. But when it comes to like buying gifts and being thoughtful, he's very, very generous, and he never thinks about not giving of himself with his time as well. I think, especially as a teacher, as someone who helps people change and grow. He's also very, very generous in that respect, giving of his time and his energy. Even though, of course, as a 5, he's concerned about his energy. But like whenever he goes anywhere, he always brings gifts for everybody, right? Like he'll think we'll go to China and we have friends there, and he remembers that they have a child or a couple children, and he's buying something for the children as well as them. So just very, very generous, very thoughtful in that way of always not only bringing a gift, but something that's sort of meaningful. So generous in a way where he's really giving something in a very thoughtful way that's really, I think, comes from his heart. So the number 3 most interesting thing about Uranio Paes is that, and I'm trying to think of things that those of you who don't know him, as a closer friend may not know. The number 3 thing is when he was in high school, he was in a Supertramp cover band, right? Well, that's sort of weird, right? And very interesting. Supertramp, some of you may know, maybe some of you younger people may not recall, was a band in the 70s. I can't remember much about them, but if you Google them, I'm sure you can find out all about them. Supertramp. They had some very popular songs for a while, the Logical song, different things like that. Anyway, he played the keyboards in a Supertramp cover band in high school. Very interesting. I mean, interesting that he played keyboards in a band, but even more interesting that it was a Supertramp cover band, right? You thought maybe they would have focused on a wider range of covers, but no, it was all about Supertramp. Very interesting. Okay, so my number two most interesting thing about Uranio Paes is that he is a really good performer. And I was really surprised by this myself, right? Like when I first met him, we were on the board of directors together of the International Enneagram Association for 6 years. And I have to tell you, he was a very serious guy, very serious. I didn't really like, I wouldn't have thought of him at the time as like someone who was super funny, like I do now. I think he has a great sense of humor. He's very humorous, as many of you know from listening to this podcast. But he's a really, really good performer. And when I say that, I'm being more specific, he's a really good singer and he's a really good actor. Sometimes at our inner work retreats, we have a party on night 4 of the psychological Enneagram retreat. And it's a come as you aren't party where you have to come and act like something that is really different than you, or you need to accentuate or emphasize or overdo something that you're trying to get more in touch with, like a 2, like really being in pride, but also something you aren't. Like one time he came as a heart type, and his acting like a heart type was really good, like really convincing and really funny. And he really got into it. And he's done many different characters over the years because we do that retreat multiple times. And he's just a very good singer and actor. Okay, number one most interesting thing about Uranio Paes is, and this one is going to be very interesting for you, and that is that he is an aspiring ventriloquist. Okay, a little bit connected to number 2. He's a good performer, although maybe not as good a performer in this category. But he used to do a puppet shows, but now he has 2 different sort of dummies, dolls, and he sometimes breaks them out and does a little bit of ventriloquism, which of course is, doing a kind of show where he's trying to project his voice coming out of a doll who has its own personality. So, very interesting, very funny, very surprising that Uranio Paes is an aspiring ventriloquist. And every once in a while, one of these dolls, I can't remember their names right now. I should have gotten an update on that before I did this top 5. But I think you've heard enough to know how very interesting that is. Okay, so we really, really appreciate you listening, watching to our Enneagram 2.0 podcast. We hope you'll join us again next time when we talk about all things Enneagram.